To understand Tolvajarvi, you have to understand what Stalin was actually trying to do. The November 30, 1939 invasion of Finland was not a single thrust at the Mannerheim line on the Karelian Isthmus. It was a 7-axis strike designed to dismember the country. The most dangerous of those axes was the central one, through Suojärvi, Tolvajarvi, and onward to the town of Väätsälä. If that axis broke through, the Red Army would reach the city of Sordavala from behind, cut off the entire Finnish IV Corps holding the line at Ladoga, and split the country at its narrowest point. 60 miles. That is all that separated the lead Soviet division from total strategic catastrophe for Finland. The unit assigned this knife stroke was the 139th Rifle Division under Brigade Commander Nikolai Beljajev, roughly 12,000 men, with tanks, motorized artillery, and air support. Behind him, the 75th Rifle Division was already moving up as reinforcement. Together, more than 20,000 soldiers. Against them, Finland had almost nothing. The covering force in the area, Task Force Räsänen, was 4 understrength battalions, reservists, border guards. Veterans of the 1918 Civil War pulled out of retirement. When Marshal Mannerheim looked at his maps in Mikkeli, he reportedly said only one word about the Central Front: catastrophe. But here is what the history books leave out. The Soviet advance was already eating itself. The 139th Division had been issued maps from the 1920s. Its supply trains were still on Russian-gauge railway tracks 60 miles behind the front. Its tanks could not maneuver off the single forest road. Its soldiers had been told they would be greeted as liberators by Finnish workers, and instead found burned villages, poisoned wells, and a silent forest full of men on skis who shot from 200 meters and vanished. By December 7, the lead Soviet regiments had outrun their kitchens. They were sleeping in the snow at -30 without winter tents. Frostbite casualties were already in the hundreds. And on December 9, into this collapsing situation, Mannerheim sent the man who would change the war. Colonel Paavo Talvela was 42 years old, a veteran of the Jäger movement, an officer Mannerheim personally trusted, but who had been out of uniform working in the timber industry until November. He arrived at the Tolvajarvi sector on December 9 with the rank of group commander and orders that amounted to 2 words: stop them. He had under his command roughly 4,000 effective soldiers, the remnants of Task Force Räsänen plus the freshly arrived Infantry Regiment 16 under Lieutenant Colonel Aaro Pajari. Pajari is the second man you have to remember. A blunt, chain-smoking infantry officer who would suffer a heart attack on the battlefield 3 days later and refuse to leave the front. On the night of December 8, before Talvela even arrived, Pajari took roughly 400 men, marched them on skis around the Soviet flank in darkness at -29 degrees, and ambushed a battalion of the Soviet 718th Rifle Regiment bivouacked on the ice of Lake Hirvasjärvi. In one engagement, Finnish accounts list over 100 Soviet dead. Pajari lost about 100 men, but he did something more important than inflict casualties. He proved to 4,000 frozen, demoralized Finns that the Red Army could be killed. If this is landing, save this video. You will want to come back to this one because what happens over the next 72 hours is one of the cleanest tactical reversals in 20th century warfare. Talvela's plan was almost insane on paper. He was outnumbered 5-1. He had no tanks, no air cover, and almost no artillery ammunition, so he decided to attack. On December 11, he ordered a coordinated assault for the following morning, a frontal pinning attack across the narrow neck of land between Tolvajarvi Lake and Hirvasjärvi Lake, combined with a flanking envelopment over the ice itself, aimed at the Soviet headquarters and the Tolvajarvi tourist hotel where Beljajev's command post was located. The temperature on the night of December 11 dropped to -36. At first light on December 12, the attack went in. And almost immediately, it began to fail. The Finnish flanking force under Pajari was caught in the open on the frozen lake by Soviet machine guns dug into the western shore. Men died in the snow in clusters. The frontal assault stalled on a small wooded ridge the Finns called Hevasalmi, horse's throat. By noon, Finnish junior officers were reporting the attack was finished. And here is the turning point, the single decision that turns Tolvajarvi from a defeat into a legend. Talvela, watching from a forward command post, refused to call it off. He committed his last uncommitted reserve, a single battalion, roughly 600 men, not to reinforce the failing flanking move, but to a fresh assault straight up the center, directly at the tourist hotel. The order, according to Finnish staff records, was 4 words: take the hotel, now. The battalion went in at 1 in the afternoon. They broke into the hotel complex from the eastern side, into a Soviet division headquarters that was eating lunch. Close-quarter combat, room by room with submachine guns and grenades and entrenching tools. The Soviet 609th Rifle Regiment, holding the hotel sector, broke. Once they broke, the entire center of the 139th Division's position came apart. By 3 in the afternoon, what had been a stalled Finnish attack was a full Soviet rout. We will get to the moment that shocked even Stalin's generals. The body count on the ice, stay with me. What happened between December 12 and December 14 at Tolvajarvi has no clean modern parallel. The 139th Rifle Division did not retreat. It dissolved. Soviet soldiers, many of them conscripts from Ukraine and Belarus dressed in cotton uniforms, ran east across the frozen lake and the forest road in temperatures that killed exposed men in 20 minutes. Finnish ski patrols pursued them along both flanks. The road east toward Ejärvi became a corridor of abandoned vehicles, frozen corpses, and surrendering soldiers too cold to lift their rifles. The 75th Rifle Division, advancing to reinforce, marched directly into the wreckage of its sister formation. Soviet artillery columns collided with infantry columns trying to retreat. Finnish forward observers called in mortar fire on the choke points. The 75th turned and joined the rout. Final tally. The 139th Rifle Division was effectively destroyed. Estimates from Soviet archives later declassified put their losses at over 4,000 killed and another 5,000 wounded, captured, or missing, roughly 70% of their starting strength. Finnish losses for the entire Tolvajarvi engagement, approximately 630 killed, 1,320 wounded. A 5-to-1 body count in favor of the side that was outnumbered 5-to-1. Finnish ski patrols captured 59 pieces of artillery, dozens of tanks and armored cars, hundreds of automatic weapons, and field kitchens still warm with soup. Brigade Commander Beljajev abandoned his command post. He was later recalled to Moscow, court-martialed for the loss of the 139th, and shot. His chief of staff, his political commissar, and at least 2 regimental commanders were also executed. Stalin's purges had already gutted the Red Army Officer Corps in 1937 and 1938. Tolvajarvi did not just kill 4,000 soldiers. It killed the careers and lives of the men sent to explain it. For the Finns, the strategic effect was immediate. The central axis of the Soviet invasion was sealed for the rest of the Winter War. The threat to Sordavala from the north vanished. The IV Corps holding the Ladoga line could fight without looking over its shoulder. Mannerheim was able to shift reserves to the Karelian Isthmus, where the real war would be decided in February. But the deeper effect was psychological. For 2 weeks, Finnish newspapers had reported nothing but retreat. Tolvajarvi was the first clean offensive victory. Photographs of captured Soviet equipment, columns of prisoners, the burned-out tourist hotel, they ran in Helsinki, in Stockholm, in London, in Washington. Volunteer recruitment offices in Sweden and the United States were flooded. Foreign military aid that had been stalled in Western capitals suddenly began to move. Paavo Talvela was promoted to Major General before Christmas. Tolvajarvi did not just shape the Winter War. It rewrote the textbook on how a smaller force defeats a larger one in winter terrain. And it taught the Red Army a lesson that came too late to matter in 1939, but would matter enormously 18 months later when the Wehrmacht crossed the border. The tactical principles the Finns demonstrated at Tolvajarvi, Madi tactics, where a road-bound enemy column is sliced into isolated pockets by ski-mobile infantry, and then reduced individually. Deep flanking moves over terrain the enemy considers impassable. Concentration of force at the enemy command node rather than the strongest point became standard study at military academies from West Point to Frunze. The U.S. Army's 10th Mountain Division, raised in 1943, was directly modeled on Finnish ski infantry doctrine. Soviet partisan operations behind German lines in 1942 and 1943 borrowed wholesale from Finnish tactics and from the very officers who had watched their comrades die at Tolvajarvi. But here is the part the history books leave out. The Soviet General Staff's official internal report on the Winter War, completed in April 1940, devoted more pages to Tolvajarvi than to any other single engagement. The report's conclusions, that Red Army officers lacked initiative, that political commissars were interfering in tactical decisions, that troops were untrained for winter operations, that command and control collapsed under stress, were presented to Stalin personally by Marshal Voroshilov. Stalin's response was to reorganize the army, abolish the dual command system between officers and commissars, and reinstate ranks and discipline. Many of the reforms that allowed the Red Army to survive 1941 and win at Moscow and Stalingrad were direct consequences of the autopsy on Tolvajarvi. In other words, 20,000 Soviet soldiers walked into a Finnish trap in December 1939, and the lessons their deaths produced may have saved the Soviet Union from Hitler 2 years later. That is the irony of Tolvajarvi that does not appear in any monument on the lakeshore. CTA 1213 Min. If you want more battles like this, the ones where the numbers should not have worked, the commanders nobody talks about, the turning points hidden inside official defeats, subscribe to WarDossier and hit the bell icon. New battle every Wednesday. The forgotten engagements that actually decided the wars you thought you knew. And drop in the comments, do you think Talvela's order to take the hotel was tactical genius, or was it luck that the Soviet headquarters happened to break first? Pick a side and defend it. Outro 1315 Min. The Tolvajarvi Tourist Hotel was rebuilt after the war. It still stands on the lakeshore, a quiet hotel in a quiet forest, and most travelers who pass through have no idea that the rooms they walk past were once cleared with submachine guns and entrenching tools by Finnish reservists in white camouflage. Paavo Talvela survived the war, served as Finland's military representative in Berlin during the Continuation War, and died in 1973. Aaro Pajari, who suffered his heart attack on the battlefield and refused evacuation, also survived. Both men carried the same private conviction for the rest of their lives, that Tolvajarvi was not won by Finnish brilliance. It was won because at one specific moment, on one specific frozen afternoon, Talvela refused to accept that the attack had failed. That is the lesson. Most battles are not lost by the side that runs out of soldiers. They are lost by the side that runs out of belief first. The Finns at Tolvajarvi were outnumbered, outgunned, freezing, and exhausted, and they kept attacking for one more hour. The Soviets, with every material advantage, broke first. If this one hit my video on the Battle of Suomussalmi, where another Finnish force annihilated the entire Soviet 44th Motorized Division 3 weeks later, will blow your mind. Same war, same winter, even bigger numbers. I will see you there. 0-0, 0-0 the setup 0-0. 45 Stalin's knife at Finland's waist 0-3. 0-0 Talvela, Pajari and the frozen lake 0-6. 0-0 the ice and the pursuit 0-9. 0-0 the doctrine and the cover-up 12. 0-0 subscribe for more 13. 0-0 the legacy of Tolvajarvi, subscribe and hit the bell icon. New battle every Wednesday.